I never imagined that the woman I loved more than anything, my wife, Emily, could betray me in such a shattering way. My name is John Matthews, and for years I believed our marriage was built on trust, loyalty, and the simple joys of everyday life. We spent countless mornings together, shared secrets over coffee, and made plans for a future that seemed bright and secure. Yet behind Emily's warm smile and gentle manner, a hidden world was developing, one that would soon unravel the very foundation of everything I held dear. It all began on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I woke early, as usual, excited for the day ahead, when I noticed that Emily's behavior was slightly off. She was rushing to get ready, her eyes distant as if haunted by thoughts she dared not share. I tried to brush it off as nothing more than a momentary lapse, a sign of stress from work or other trivial matters. However, as days turned into weeks, subtle inconsistencies crept into our routine. Late-night phone calls, hushed whispers when she thought I wasn't listening, and unexplained absences began to mount in a way that I could no longer ignore. One evening, as the rain pounded against the windows and the house lay silent, I decided to return home early from work. The usual comforting hum of domestic life was replaced by an eerie quiet. I moved cautiously through the darkened hall, my heart pounding with an inexplicable dread. When I reached the living room, I heard soft, intimate laughter coming from behind the half-open door. Peeking in, I was met with a sight that would forever change my life. Emily was sitting close to a man I'd never seen before, laughing as if they shared a secret. In that moment, every cherished memory, every vow of loyalty, seemed to crumble around me. The man's name, Mark, as I would later learn, echoed in my mind as I stood frozen in disbelief, unable to process the betrayal unfolding before my eyes. For what felt like an eternity, I remained hidden in the shadows, overwhelmed by a mix of shock, sorrow, and seething anger. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Had I been blind to the signs? In that suffocating silence, every moment stretched out into a painful eternity. I slowly backed away, tears welling up in my eyes, my entire world suddenly tinted with betrayal. I spent the rest of that night in a tortured state, unable to sleep, haunted by the image of Emily laughing in the arms of another man. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotion. I found myself torn between confronting her immediately and gathering more evidence to confirm the painful truth. I retraced our shared memories, searching desperately for any indication that I might have been misled, but the more I thought back, the clearer it became. The signs had been there all along, hidden in subtle moments that I had once dismissed. Each late return, every hushed conversation, and every unexplained expense painted a damning portrait of deception. My heart ached with the realization that the love I believed in was nothing more than a fragile illusion. Driven by a need for certainty, I began to covertly track her movements. I noted the unusual places she frequented, a secluded cafe here, a dimly lit bar there, and discovered that her phone was never truly silent. I saw her entering unfamiliar neighborhoods, places where the neon lights of questionable establishments flickered in the darkness. The more I observed, the more the undeniable truth set in. Emily had been living a double life. Every new piece of evidence I uncovered, receipts for late-night hotel stays, unexplained charges on our joint accounts, a stray key hidden in her purse, wrought fresh pain on my already wounded heart. One particularly stormy night, I found an envelope tucked away in her handbag. With trembling fingers, I opened it to reveal a trove of damning evidence. Photographs of her and Mark at various locations, handwritten notes that spoke of secret rendezvous, and tickets for events that I had never heard her mention. The envelope was like a silent confession, a final, irrefutable admission of her betrayal. As I pored over its contents, a crushing wave of anger and despair washed over me. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of lies, each new fact another drop of acid burning away at the foundation of our marriage. Yet amid the turmoil, I was gripped by an internal conflict. Part of me longed to confront Emily immediately, to demand answers, to vent the hurt and anger that had been building inside me. But another part of me, the rational part, feared that a head-on confrontation might lead to unforeseen consequences. I had heard stories where similar betrayals had escalated beyond control, sometimes even drawing the attention of the police. I was determined not to let our private tragedy become a public spectacle, to keep the situation contained even as my heart broke. I resolved to remain calm, to approach the situation with a clear mind despite the storm of emotions raging within me. In the weeks that followed, the tension in our home became palpable. Emily's once warm presence turned distant and guarded, and I sensed that she too was struggling under the weight of secrets. Every glance, every word exchanged, became loaded with unsaid truths. I found myself rehearsing the confrontation in my mind repeatedly, imagining the questions I would ask, the tone I would use, and the answers I might receive. I wanted to believe that there was still a chance for us to salvage what had been broken, but the evidence was too overwhelming, the betrayal too deep to ignore. That fateful night, with the storm still raging outside, I decided it was time to confront the inevitable. I sat at the dining table, the envelope of evidence spread out before me like a noose tightening around my heart. I rehearsed my words, trying to steady my trembling hands and calm my racing thoughts. I realized that this was the moment that would define the rest of my life, the moment when I had to choose between holding on to a shattered dream or stepping forward into an uncertain future, free of lies. I knew that the coming confrontation would be painful, that it might irrevocably alter the course of my life. But I also knew that living in the shadow of betrayal was no way to continue. The truth, as harsh as it was, offered a path, albeit a difficult one, toward healing and self-respect. With the envelope clutched in my hand and a heart heavy with sorrow, I took a deep breath and prepared myself for the conversation that would change everything. In that charged silence, amid the relentless drum of the rain, I braced myself for the night ahead, a night of revelations, heartbreak, and the painful unraveling of a life once built on trust. I sat alone in the darkened living room long after the storm had subsided, each minute stretching out into an eternity of regret and resolve. The evidence was clear, the betrayal undeniable, and yet the thought of confronting the woman I once loved left me paralyzed. But I knew that the time for silence was over. I had to face the truth head-on, regardless of the cost. That night, as I lay awake listening to the soft hum of the cooling house, I made a silent vow to myself. I would reclaim my dignity, I would find the strength to move on, and I would ensure that the painful lessons of this betrayal would guide me toward a future where trust could someday be rebuilt. Slowly, as dawn crept over the horizon, I gathered the remnants of my shattered heart and steeled myself for what was to come. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with pain, but I knew that I had no choice but to confront the reality of my situation. With each beat of my heart, I resolved to confront Emily with the truth, to demand the answers that had long been hidden, and to step into a future where I could finally begin to heal. I had spent days agonizing over the evidence, and the confrontation I knew was inevitable. Every minute away from that painful truth only built the tension inside me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The weight of betrayal pressed down like a vice. In those long, sleepless nights, I reread the envelope's contents, each photograph and note fueling a fire of hurt and confusion. I began to recall moments I had dismissed, the little slips in Emily's demeanor that now burned with significance. I had to know the whole truth, even if it meant facing a barrage of painful confessions. The day I decided to confront her arrived with a heavy, leaden sky. I found Emily in the kitchen, quietly preparing breakfast as if nothing was amiss. The normalcy of the scene only heightened my internal chaos. I tried to speak casually at first, asking about her night before work, but her eyes darted away, and her smile was strained. The silence between us grew thick, laden with the secrets I had unearthed. I knew then that nothing would ever be the same. I sat down at the table and spread out the envelope before her. "Emily," I said softly, my voice trembling with a mixture of sorrow and anger, "I found these in your purse." Her face went pale, and for a moment, the room was filled with a deafening silence. I could see the realization dawning on her, the realization that every lie, every secret, had finally been laid bare. The conversation that followed was as excruciating as it was long overdue. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she tried to explain. She spoke haltingly, offering vague excuses about stress and mistakes. I listened, my heart breaking with every feeble justification she uttered. Yet as she spoke, it became clear that her words were mere attempts to patch up a wound that had already festered beyond repair. The photographs, the receipts, the notes, they were all undeniable proof of her betrayal. I pressed her for answers. How long had this been going on? Who was Mark? Each question seemed only to deepen her despair. The conversation escalated into a heated exchange, neither of us able to contain the torrent of emotions any longer. I demanded to know why she had kept this secret, why our life together had been built on a lie. Emily's voice cracked as she admitted that she felt trapped in a marriage that no longer fulfilled her. She described feelings of isolation and loneliness, feelings she claimed had driven her to seek comfort elsewhere. In that moment, I realized that our love story had been marred by silence, by unspoken needs and unmet expectations. Yet, her choices were hers alone, and I bore the pain of betrayal that came with them. As the morning wore on, the conversation turned from accusations and confessions to a stark discussion of reality. We spoke about the future, about whether there was any hope of salvaging the fragments of trust that still remained. I insisted that honesty was the only path forward, even if it meant facing a painful truth. Emily, her voice barely audible, admitted that she had tried to end things multiple times, but something always held her back. She claimed that fear of losing the life we had built together, kept her entangled in a web of lies. I listened in disbelief, my heart shattering further with each new detail. Outside, the storm that had raged the night before had given way to a dull, overcast day, a fitting backdrop for the gloom that now settled over our lives. I spent that day in a fog of mixed emotions. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to cling to the hope that we might rebuild what was lost. But another part of me was irrevocably broken, the trust we had nurtured reduced to ashes by her betrayal. I found myself oscillating between moments of numb resignation and bursts of intense anger. In the quiet solitude of our now divided home, I began the painful process of reckoning with the fact that the woman I loved was no longer the person I had believed her to be. In the weeks that followed, as I attempted to piece together the remnants of my shattered heart, I embarked on a journey of discovery. I revisited old photographs, reread the journal entries of our early days together, and searched for clues to what had gone wrong. Every memory was now a double-edged sword, a reminder of a past filled with both love and betrayal. I began to understand that the truth, as painful as it was, might be the only way to reclaim my sense of self. I resolved to document every detail of our unraveling, not only as a means of processing my own grief, but also as a way of ensuring that I would never again be taken by surprise. That day, as I sat alone in the quiet of our living room with the envelope spread out before me, I realized that the discovery of Emily's betrayal was not just an end, but also a beginning. It marked the moment when I had to decide whether to be consumed by bitterness or to forge a new path forward. I knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with pain, but I also knew that I owed it to myself to confront the truth head-on and rebuild my life on a foundation of honesty, even if that truth was born from betrayal. I promised myself that I would seek out every hidden detail, that I would leave no stone unturned in understanding how our love had decayed into deception. In the quiet that followed our conversation, I began to realize that some wounds, though deeply painful, might eventually lead to a kind of liberation. The discovery of Emily's betrayal was a turning point, a painful awakening that forced me to confront the imperfections of our marriage and to face the difficult task of rebuilding my life from the ashes of lost trust. That day, with the evidence of our shattered promises spread out before me, I resolved that I would no longer allow secrets to govern my life. I would seek the truth, no matter how harsh, and in doing so, I would find the strength to move forward. As the overcast sky outside mirrored the turmoil within, I knew that the journey of discovery had only just begun, and that every painful detail would ultimately lead me toward a future where honesty and self-respect could finally prevail. It was a cold, gray morning when I first sensed that the consequences of Emily's betrayal were about to escalate beyond our private turmoil. My mind was still reeling from the revelations of her duplicity, and I was slowly coming to terms with the painful reality that our lives had been irrevocably altered. In the days following our heart-wrenching conversation, I attempted to regain some semblance of normalcy. However, fate had other plans that would soon thrust me into an unforeseen confrontation with the law. After the confrontation, tension in our household reached a boiling point. I began to receive cryptic phone calls at odd hours, and unfamiliar vehicles were often seen parked discreetly near our home. At first, I dismissed these occurrences as mere coincidences, remnants of a troubled mind grappling with heartbreak. But then came the day when a stern knock at the door shattered any lingering illusion of privacy. 2 police officers stood on our doorstep, their expressions unreadable as they introduced themselves and explained that they were following up on a series of anonymous tips regarding suspicious activities in the neighborhood. The officers' presence sent a shockwave through me. I quickly realized that what had begun as a private betrayal was now evolving into something far more dangerous, an entanglement with authorities who were determined to uncover the full scope of the secrets that had festered in our home. I invited them in, my hands trembling as I attempted to maintain control of a situation that had rapidly spiraled out of my grasp. Every question they asked felt like a probe into the deepest recesses of my personal life, forcing me to recount details I had long tried to bury. As the officers questioned me about Emily's whereabouts during the times of the reported incidents, I explained the situation as truthfully as I could. I spoke of the strange phone calls, the mysterious absences, and the envelope of evidence that had confirmed my worst fears. The officers exchanged glances, their expressions softening ever so slightly as they began to understand the full context of the matter. They explained that the anonymous tips were linked to reports of suspected fraud and embezzlement in the neighborhood, allegations that, in all likelihood, were completely unrelated to my personal crisis. And yet, the timing of these tips coincided too closely with the unraveling of my own life to be dismissed as coincidence. With a calm yet authoritative manner, one of the officers suggested that Emily might be involved in a larger scheme, a possibility that sent a new chill down my spine. Had the woman I loved been part of something far more sinister than a mere extramarital affair? I struggled to reconcile the tender, caring partner I once knew with the hints of a hidden life that now emerged in fragments of evidence and suspicious phone calls. The thought was both inconceivable and horrifying, and I was torn between protecting her secret and exposing the truth. I explained that I had no evidence of any criminal activity beyond the betrayal itself, but that I was willing to cooperate fully if there was even a remote chance that something larger was at play. The officers left after a lengthy discussion, promising to return if further evidence emerged. In the wake of their departure, a heavy silence settled over our home, a silence laden with the foreboding sense that our private tragedy had now merged with a broader investigation. I spent the rest of that day in a haze of disbelief, grappling with the fact that my personal heartbreak had inadvertently become entangled with potential criminal implications. The thought of law enforcement sifting through the ruins of our marriage filled me with a sense of helplessness, yet I also knew that I had no choice but to see this through. Over the next several days, the tension only mounted. Emily became increasingly withdrawn, her eyes often distant as if she were haunted by unseen terrors. The police made sporadic visits, each time asking for details about her schedule, her phone calls, and even her acquaintances. I tried to shield her from the inquiries, but it soon became apparent that her secret life was drawing the scrutiny of authorities. Every unexpected knock on the door, every suspicious glance from a neighbor, added to the unbearable pressure of living a double life that was now on the brink of exposure. In the midst of this chaos, I found myself caught between two worlds, the personal betrayal that had shattered my trust and the looming specter of a legal investigation that threatened to drag our private lives into the harsh light of public scrutiny. I spent countless sleepless nights agonizing over the choices that lay ahead. Should I protect Emily, the woman I once loved despite her transgressions, or should I cooperate fully with the investigation, risking the exposure of everything that we had tried so desperately to hide? The decision was excruciating, and each passing hour brought me closer to an irrevocable choice. As the police continued their inquiries, I realized that the confrontation with the law was not merely an external force, it was a reflection of the internal chaos that had long been simmering beneath the surface. My trust in the system, in the idea that truth and justice could coexist, was being tested in ways I had never imagined. The officers' calm professionalism clashed with the raw, unfiltered pain of my personal betrayal, creating a dissonance that echoed in every corner of our once happy home. In the final confrontation, an officer gently but firmly advised that any further attempts to conceal details or mislead the investigation would only worsen an already volatile situation. It was then that I realized the full magnitude of the consequences that had been set in motion by Emily's duplicity. With no other choice, I committed myself to full transparency, determined to cooperate with the investigation even as my heart bled from the wounds of betrayal. I provided every scrap of evidence I had gathered, the envelope, the photographs, and the journal entries, and in doing so, I hoped to reclaim some semblance of control over a life that had spiraled into chaos. As the day drew to a close and the officers departed once more, I sat alone in the silent, dimly lit room that had once been filled with laughter and love. The confrontation with the law had forced me to face not only the betrayal of my wife, but also the harsh reality that some secrets have far-reaching consequences. I knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, and that the truth, once unleashed, could never be contained. And so, with a heavy heart and a soul marked by sorrow, I steeled myself for the inevitable fallout, a fallout that would not only redefine my relationship with Emily, but also shape the future of my very existence. In the wake of the legal confrontation, My world lay in ruins, a shattered mirror of the life I once knew. The fallout from Emily's betrayal, amplified by the intrusion of law enforcement, forced me to confront the consequences of secrets kept and lies told. I spent days in a fog of regret and introspection, struggling to come to terms with the irreversible changes that had been set in motion. My mind was a battleground of conflicting emotions, the lingering love for a woman who had betrayed me and the bitter sting of betrayal that had left me questioning everything I once held true. Every corner of our home now carried painful memories of happier times. The very walls that had once echoed with laughter now resonated with silence and sorrow. I found solace only in the small moments of clarity, the quiet early mornings before the day's demands set in, the solitary walks in the nearby park, where the rustling leaves seemed to whisper fragments of a life I wished I could forget. Yet, even in these moments, I could not escape the haunting presence of what had transpired. The envelope, the photographs, and the endless questions remained etched in my memory like scars that refused to fade. Emily, too, was a changed woman. Gone was the vibrant, loving partner I had known. In her place was a shell of regret, a person who appeared to be constantly at odds with the consequences of her actions. Our conversations had become stilted, strained by the weight of unspoken truths and the ever-present tension of an ongoing investigation. I could see in her eyes the reflection of a woman who had lost herself in a labyrinth of deceit, a woman who was now as much a victim of her own choices as I was of the betrayal. In the aftermath of the police inquiries, I struggled with the practicalities of rebuilding my life. The legal ramifications of the investigation loomed in the background like a dark cloud, and I knew that the truth would eventually demand its due in the court of public opinion. I spent long hours sifting through memories and evidence, determined to understand every nuance of the deception that had led us to this painful crossroads. I began to document my thoughts and experiences in a journal, a way of processing the raw emotions and preserving the details of a life irrevocably changed. As time passed, I gradually recognized that the only path forward was to embrace the truth, however painful it might be, and to allow myself the space to heal. I sought solace in the small acts of daily resilience, reaching out to close friends for support, rediscovering the hobbies and passions I had long neglected, and taking measured steps toward reclaiming a sense of self that had been lost amid the chaos. Every day was a struggle, a battle between the longing for what once was and the necessity of moving on. Yet with each sunrise, I discovered a quiet strength emerging from the depths of my despair, a strength born from the recognition that I could no longer allow the past to dictate my future. Emily and I eventually reached a turning point. The investigation wound down with no further evidence of criminal activity beyond the betrayal itself, and while the legal ramifications were minimal, the emotional fallout was profound. In a final, candid conversation, we both acknowledged that our marriage had been irreparably damaged. There were no grand declarations of forgiveness or promises of a miraculous recovery, only the painful acceptance that our paths were now destined to diverge. I realized that while I might always carry the scars of her betrayal, I could choose to grow from the experience rather than be defined by it. In the quiet days that followed our separation, I slowly began to rebuild the fragments of my life. I learned that recovery was not a linear process, but rather a series of small, determined steps toward reclaiming my dignity and self-worth. I embraced therapy, confided in trusted friends, and even rediscovered my love for writing, each word a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of betrayal and heartache. Though the memories of that dark chapter would forever linger in the recesses of my mind, I chose to view them as painful lessons that had ultimately guided me toward a stronger, more honest version of myself. Now, as I look back on those tumultuous months, I see a journey of immense sorrow, hard-won clarity, and the promise of new beginnings. The aftermath of Emily's betrayal and the unexpected confrontation with the law taught me that even in the midst of overwhelming pain, one can find the strength to rebuild, to forgive oneself, and to dare to hope again. Those scars may never fully fade. They serve as enduring reminders of the resilience of the human heart and the capacity to transform even the darkest of experiences into a future filled with cautious optimism and hard-earned freedom.